Welcome to a journey into the dark skies of aviation history, where truth hides behind wreckage and unanswered questions. If you seek stories that shake the soul and reveal hidden shadows, you're in the right place. Stay with us, subscribe now, and uncover mysteries the world tried to forget. It began like any other flight, a routine journey that was never meant to make headlines or carve its name into the chapters of aviation's darkest mysteries. Passengers boarded with the usual mix of excitement, fatigue, and anticipation, unaware that the skies above the Red Sea would soon turn from a symbol of freedom into a grave of silence. The air was calm, the route familiar, and every sign pointed to nothing more than another uneventful crossing. Yet as the aircraft cut through the blue expanse, something shifted, a change so subtle at first that no one on board could have sensed the storm creeping toward them. The Red Sea, a body of water that has witnessed centuries of human history, would become the final witness to an event that investigators later described as both shocking and baffling. Radar screens showed normal patterns one moment and a sudden drop the next, as if the aircraft had been swallowed whole by the void. No distress call, no clear warning, just a descent that defied the normal sequence of failures. For the families waiting at the destination, minutes turned into hours of silence, and soon the dreadful news broke: contact had been lost. Rescue teams mobilized, their boats cutting across the sea in desperate search of survivors. From the sky, helicopters scanned the waves, looking for even the smallest sign of life, a floating vest, or the wreckage that could explain what had gone so terribly wrong. But what they found was more haunting than hopeful. Pieces of debris scattered across the shimmering surface painted a grim picture. The fragments spoke of violence in the air, of a sudden end that gave no time for passengers to react. The once quiet Red Sea became a graveyard of twisted metal and broken dreams. Witnesses on nearby vessels recalled strange sights, a flash, a sound that didn't belong to the natural rhythm of the ocean. Some claimed they saw the plane descend unnaturally fast, others whispered about an explosion. None of these accounts could fully explain the truth, but all carried the same weight: something was deeply wrong. The tragedy was no ordinary accident. It carried with it a sense of deliberate silence, as though the cause was buried under layers of shadow. For the world, it was another headline of disaster. But for those tasked with piecing together the events, it was the beginning of a nightmare investigation. The unexpected nature of the crash stunned officials, for everything before that final moment had seemed normal, routine, even predictable. The aircraft had no major mechanical warnings, no reported distress from the crew, and no indication that disaster was near. To vanish in this manner above one of the world's most strategically important regions raised alarms far beyond the realm of aviation. The Red Sea crash was more than a tragic accident. It was the kind of event that makes seasoned investigators shiver, because it broke the pattern of reason. In the shadows of that calm flight, something extraordinary and terrifying had occurred. As the first hours passed after the crash, the weight of uncertainty began to grow heavier, because the circumstances surrounding this disaster refused to align with any known explanation. Aviation accidents, as grim as they are, usually follow patterns: mechanical failures, human errors, or weather disturbances. But in this case, investigators quickly realized they were standing in front of something different, something that did not obey the rules of normal tragedy. The plane's final moments were wrapped in silence, no distress calls from the pilots, no signals of emergency, and no clear technical issues recorded in the last communication. It was as though the aircraft had crossed into a void where sound and reason disappeared. The conditions in the sky that day were calm. There were no violent storms, no lightning strikes, no turbulence severe enough to shake an airliner from the heavens. Even the aircraft itself had been cleared in good condition before departure, making it all the more difficult to grasp why it went down so suddenly. The sea below was placid, reflecting the sunlight in endless waves, but it would soon hold the weight of a secret that no one could immediately uncover. These calm surroundings made the tragedy all the more chilling, because chaos had struck in a place where serenity reigned. Witnesses from nearby ships added layers of strangeness to the event. Some reported hearing a sharp, unnatural sound cutting across the sky. Others described seeing the aircraft descend too quickly, as though it were being pulled by an invisible hand. Their testimonies were fragmented, but they carried a common thread: the descent was not normal, and the sight of an aircraft falling in such a manner suggested forces at work beyond typical aviation scenarios. As rescuers continued to recover fragments from the sea, the mystery only deepened. The wreckage was scattered in ways that did not perfectly align with a straightforward impact. Certain pieces bore marks that hinted at unusual stress, as though the aircraft had been under extraordinary strain in the final seconds. These signs were troubling because they opened doors to questions investigators were not ready to answer. Was there an external factor, something beyond human control, that brought the plane down? Or was there a hidden malfunction buried so deep within the systems that it escaped every pre-flight check? What haunted the search teams most was the absence of life. Despite their desperate efforts, the Red Sea yielded only silence, a silence so thick it pressed against the minds of all who searched its waters. Aviation tragedies often leave behind survivors or voices calling for help, but here there was nothing, only the eerie stillness of the waves and fragments of a story too fractured to piece together in those early days. This strange stillness, the lack of warning signs, the unusual descent, all of it formed a puzzle that stunned experts and horrified families. It wasn't just a crash, it was a shadow draped across the Red Sea, an event that defied easy explanation and hinted at secrets that would not be easily uncovered. When news of the crash reached the desks of American investigators, it was met with a sense of urgency that went beyond routine protocol. The Red Sea was not just any body of water. It was a region tied to military strategy, trade, and global security. For a modern aircraft to vanish in such a controlled flight path without a clear cause, it instantly drew attention from U.S. agencies that specialized not only in aviation disasters but in uncovering threats that might ripple far beyond a single tragedy. Teams were dispatched quickly, equipped with advanced technology and an unshakable resolve to uncover the truth. What they found in those first days left even the most seasoned investigators shaken. The recovery of the wreckage revealed contradictions. Some parts appeared to show evidence of high-speed impact, while others seemed to have detached midair, a phenomenon that raised red flags. American experts, known for their rigorous and methodical approach, could not ignore the inconsistencies. Every shard of twisted metal told a story, but the stories did not fit together neatly. It was like piecing together a puzzle with missing fragments, where the picture it was forming grew darker with each discovery. The flight data recorders, often called the black boxes, were pulled from the depths of the Red Sea with great effort. When examined, the results were startling. There was no frantic communication, no desperate attempts by the pilots to explain what was happening. The recordings showed only the sound of a normal flight, followed by sudden silence, as if the very heart of the plane had been ripped away in an instant. For the Americans, who had investigated countless crashes around the globe, this absence of struggle was unnerving. Pilots always fight to the last second, leaving behind traces of their battle. Here, there was nothing but a void. As word spread among the investigative teams, theories began to form, none of them comforting. Some speculated that a catastrophic systems failure had occurred so quickly that the crew never had a chance to react. Others feared the possibility of an external event, an explosion, a weapon, or a strike, that erased the opportunity for survival. But with no conclusive evidence pointing to one cause, the Americans faced a wall of uncertainty. The sheer strangeness of the findings shook them, because in aviation, almost everything has an explanation. This case was threatening that rule. Families of the victims demanded answers, and the eyes of the world were on the investigation. The United States, with its reputation for uncovering truth in even the darkest disasters, felt the pressure mounting. Yet behind closed doors, whispers circulated among the teams. Something about this crash did not feel ordinary. The patterns were too fractured, the silence too heavy, the traces of evidence too conflicted. For the investigators, it was not just another case file. It was a haunting enigma that reached beyond aviation into the realm of the unknown. And as they sifted through every broken piece of metal and every second of missing time, they realized this was not merely a crash. It was a riddle cast into the depths of the Red Sea, waiting to challenge everything they thought they knew. What came next was the part of the story that would etch this tragedy deeper into the pages of aviation history, the dark revelations that emerged from the investigation. As American experts examined the evidence more closely, details began to surface that defied ordinary explanations. The wreckage bore marks that suggested sudden structural failure, but not in the way they were used to seeing. Certain components look almost torn apart, as though extraordinary pressure had struck them all at once. This wasn't the slow unraveling of a failing system. It was abrupt, violent, and absolute. Inside the recovered data, the silence of the cockpit remained one of the most disturbing aspects. Pilots do not go quietly. In the seconds before disaster, there are always shouts, warnings, and desperate attempts to save the plane. Yet here, the recordings ended in unnatural calm, cut off without warning, as if something erased their final struggle. Investigators who listened to the tapes described the absence of chaos as more haunting than the sound of panic could ever be. It left them wondering if the crew had even known what was coming, or if the event had struck so suddenly that they never had a chance to react. Even more unsettling were the patterns found in the debris field. Normally, a crash produces a spread that makes sense, impact at sea level, breaking apart on contact. But in this case, the distribution told a different story. Some fragments were discovered miles away from others, implying that the aircraft may have begun breaking apart mid-air, long before it hit the water. The implications of this were chilling. A mid-air disintegration pointed to either a catastrophic failure no one had ever predicted or an external force that had torn the plane apart. Neither answer brought comfort, only deeper shadows. For American investigators, trained to follow facts and not speculation, the findings forced them to confront unsettling possibilities. One theory suggested an explosive decompression, but the structural evidence was inconsistent. Another theory whispered about sabotage, though no clear traces of such an act could be found. The more they dug, the less clarity they had, and yet the sense of something hidden beneath the surface grew stronger with each discovery. The families of the victims pressed for answers, but the revelations they were given only deepened their pain. They were told of the plane's silence, of the eerie break-up patterns, of the unexplained forces that seemed to have ripped apart what should have been a safe and routine flight. Instead of closure, they received fragments of a nightmare with no clear ending. The Red Sea itself seemed to guard its secret, swallowing any final clue that could resolve the mystery. For the investigators, these revelations were more than technical puzzles, they were warnings. The idea that a modern aircraft could fall from the sky without distress, without explanation, and with such violent finality was a reminder that not all answers lie within human grasp. This was no longer just a crash, it was a story of silence, of shadows, and of revelations too dark to fit neatly into reports. And with every unsettling clue, the sense grew stronger this mystery had not yet finished speaking. Even after months of investigation, when reports were drafted and evidence catalogued, the shadows around the Red Sea crash refused to fade. What troubled investigators most was not what they found, but what remained missing. Every conclusion led to another unanswered question. Every answer dissolved into uncertainty. The families of those lost demanded clarity, but clarity was the one thing no expert could deliver. The wreckage, the recordings, and the witness testimonies told fragments of a story, but none of it aligned into a truth that could be spoken with confidence. The silence of the cockpit haunted every meeting room. It suggested that the crew either never saw the danger or was silenced in a way beyond comprehension. Investigators replayed the recordings again and again, searching for faint sounds, background noise, any clue to explain why no distress call was made. But there was nothing except a void. The idea that trained pilots, faced with catastrophe, could leave behind no trace of reaction disturbed even the most experienced analysts. It defied the human instinct to fight for survival until the last second. The wreckage itself carried contradictions that investigators could not resolve. Some parts suggested a sudden disintegration, others hinted at a violent impact. Yet no single theory fit all the evidence. If it had been mechanical failure, why were there no warnings? If it had been sabotage, why was there no clear trace of explosives? If it had been external interference, then from where did it come? And how did it strike so decisively without leaving a signature? Each possibility carried weight, yet none could be proven beyond doubt. The crash lived in a gray zone between explanations, a place where science and fact met shadows. For many observers, the Red Sea began to feel less like an accident site and more like a graveyard of secrets. Devers spoke of the eerie stillness beneath the waves, where the wreckage lay like a silent testimony to something unspeakable. Investigators who spent weeks at sea admitted in private that the case unsettled them in ways others never had. This was not just about aviation. It felt larger, heavier, almost as if the crash was a symptom of forces the world was not ready to face. Questions lingered in every corner. Could the aircraft have been caught in a rare atmospheric event that left no record? Was there a systems failure buried so deep within the technology that no checklist could have foreseen it? Or was the truth far darker, hidden deliberately, erased from view by hands that did not wish it revealed? Each question carried a chill, because none could be answered with certainty, and the lack of answers was its own kind of horror. In the end, the official findings could not erase the unease. What happened over the Red Sea was more than a tragedy. It was a riddle carved into history, a reminder of how fragile control in the skies can be, and how quickly certainty can collapse into silence. The investigators left with more doubts than discoveries, and the world was left with a haunting realization: some mysteries do not close, they linger, waiting to be remembered. The story of the Red Sea crash is not just about a plane that fell from the sky. It is about the silence it left behind, the questions that still hover like shadows, and the pain etched into the hearts of those who will never see their loved ones return. As the investigation closed with words like inconclusive and uncertain, the families were left to carry grief without answers. And the rest of the world was left with a chilling reminder that not every mystery can be solved, and not every tragedy fits neatly into the boxes of science and logic. This was not simply an accident. It became a haunting, an echo that still lingers over the waters of the Red Sea. When we look back at tragedies like this, we are not only uncovering the technical details of what went wrong, but also exposing the fragility of human control in a world where the unknown is always waiting. The investigators walked away with their equipment and their files, but they could not walk away from the weight of what they had seen. A crash without warning, a cockpit without a final call, and a sea that kept more than it gave back. It is these absences that make the Red Sea mystery stand apart from so many others. They remind us that there are forces we do not fully understand, and truths that may never come to light. For the families, every unanswered question is a wound. For the investigators, every gap in the evidence is a challenge to their craft. For the rest of us, this story becomes a symbol of how little separates the ordinary from the unthinkable. One moment passengers are fastening their seatbelts, planning their arrivals, living their everyday lives. The next moment, they are part of a headline, swallowed by a mystery that shakes the confidence of even the most seasoned experts. It is this fragility, this razor-thin line between normalcy and disaster, that should make us pause. And so, as we close this chapter, we do not find resolution. What we find is a call to remember. To remember those who lost their lives, to respect the pain of the families, and to acknowledge that mysteries like this should not be buried under the noise of daily news cycles. They demand to be told again and again, not to sensationalize tragedy, but to honor the truth that something happened here, something that changed lives forever and left scars on the history of aviation. If you have stayed with this story until now, it means you are not afraid to look into the darker corners of truth. It means you understand that behind every wreckage lies a human story worth remembering. Stay with us as we continue to uncover the mysteries the world tried to silence. Subscribe, share this story, and keep these voices alive. Because some mysteries never die, they only wait for us to keep listening.